state audit findings that have gone unaddressed over multiple years, an absence of meaningful performance metrics, and increasing state use of TANF for child welfare with few accountability measures. TANF was created nearly 30 years ago as part of the historic Republican-led welfare reforms of 1996. Thanks to work requirements and time limits, basic assistance caseloads have declined, allowing states to shift TANF spending to non-assistance. The problem is that TANF has not been reauthorized since 2005, but continues to receive funding on autopilot. Congress must revisit the program, not only to modernize TANF as part of a comprehensive reauthorization, but to make necessary reforms to recognize the shift to non-assistance spending to improve accountability. My belief is that we need to reclaim TANF for work, do a better job of targeting funding towards the more vulnerable families, to the most vulnerable families, and restore the program to its original roots. I know many of my colleagues on this subcommittee share these views and have introduced legislation to make some of these changes. On its current path, TANF is failing beneficiaries who need economic security, and it's also failing taxpayers whose money should be spent intentionally and strategically to support work. By modernizing the program while ensuring that it continues to serve those who rely on it, we can reduce dependency and empower Americans to uplift themselves. I'm honored to have our guests here today and look forward to your testimony. And with that, I'm pleased to recognize the gentleman from Illinois, the ranking member, and my friend, Representative Davis, for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you for this hearing. I also want to thank all of our witnesses for coming and sharing with us. I greatly appreciate our subcommittee's bipartisan work on home visiting and child welfare in particular. But I can't sit here this afternoon and pretend that this hearing is anything but a preemptive justification to support cuts that will keep struggling families struggling and secure the wealthiest and most secure people in our country. Nor can I ignore that our Republican partners remained silent while Secretary Kennedy took Elon Musk's chainsaw to the Department of Health and Human Services, putting implementation of all our work at risk. If our goal is truly to discuss TANF reform, why do my Republican colleagues continue promising deep cuts in TANF and similar programs like the Social Services Block Grant to pay for tax giveaways to the wealthy? Cutting TANF funding will cut child care, child welfare services, and help for struggling parents, making the lives of children and families worse, not better. If the goal is to make TANF accountable, I urge my colleagues to support the bill Representative Chu and I introduced to give HHS the tools they need to penalize states for gross malfeasance. State accountability was left out of the original law by design of its Republican drafters, and only Congress can fix that. If accountability is important, I urge my colleagues to join me in calling on President Trump to withdraw his nomination of Thomas March Bell for HHS Inspector General, given that he was fired from a previous job for mishandling taxpayer dollars. Focusing on the minutiae of TANF policy seemed to sidestep our subcommittee's obligation to ask more important questions. Are families better off than they were 4 months ago? And will the Republican Congress provide the supports Americans need to survive the recession and harm caused by the Trump policies? Unfortunately, the answer is a resounding no. The Trump tariff tax is making the cost of basic necessities like food, housing, and utilities spike, while savings and retirement balances have plummeted by trillions of dollars, while retirees fear their survival, as President Trump and Elon Musk work to dismantle the Social Security Administration. I appreciate the work of the experts here before us, and I thank you. But focusing on narrow process issues instead of protecting the people we represent from cruel and chaotic policies is like focusing on the details of a fire truck while the house burns down. Seniors, children, and families need us to act to protect them. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. I will now introduce our witnesses. I'll go from my left to right. First is Jeffrey Arkin, is the director of the GAO Strategic Issues Team. Next is Kathy Laren, who is the director of the GAO Education, Workforce, and Income Security Team. Next, James Dalkin is the director of the GAO Financial Management and Assurance Team. Next is Sato Bagdoian, is the director of the GAO Forensic Audits and Investigative Services Team. And lastly is Roxanne Summerlet, who is the director of the Marion County Department of Job and Family Services in Marion, Ohio. We'll first start with you, Mr. Arkin, and you're now recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Chairman LaHood, Ranking Member Davis, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting GAO to speak at today's hearing. Today, GAO issued the final report in a series of reviews of TANF spending and oversight. And my GAO colleagues and I will discuss some of what we found with those reports and recommendations that we made to improve oversight of TANF. I will start by talking about trends and expenditures, and as also on oversight of state reporting on those expenditures by the Department of Health and Human Services, and then my colleagues will discuss other aspects of TANF. States have substantial flexibility to determine how to spend their TANF funds. The two most common categories of TANF expenditures are known as assistance, which covers benefits such as cash payments to eligible families, and non-assistance, which covers services like child care or employment training. And since TANF's beginnings, we've seen a move away from assistance spending towards non-assistance spending. In our recent work, we found that for fiscal year 2022, non-assistance spending accounted for about 44% of states' total spending, and that includes the federal TANF block grant as well as states' own contributions. In comparison, assistance spending accounted for about 25% of all TANF spending, and states spent the remaining share on things like program management or transfers to block grants. Likewise, we've seen an increase in the amount of unused federal TANF funds that states have carried over from year to year, which is allowed under the law. As we recently reported, and as you can see on the monitors, on the chart in the monitors, at the end of fiscal year 2015, states collectively had a balance of unspent funds of $4 billion. By the end of fiscal year 2022, that amount had more than doubled to $9 billion. And in fiscal year 2023, that amount increased again to $10 billion. Some of those unspent balances are funds that states have already committed or obligated but have yet to spend, and that's the light blue area on the chart on the monitor. But the bulk of the unspent balances are unobligated or not yet committed to a specific expenditure, and that's the dark blue area on the figure. HHS requires states to file various reports that provide information on their TANF expenditures, and we found some issues with those reports that could inhibit HHS's oversight of the program. HHS requires states to submit reports that include narratives describing certain types of expenditures, such as non-assistance expenditures. In reviewing these reports, we found that some states did not include the required narrative, and we recommended that HHS take steps to require those states, or rather ensure that those states submit complete narrative in their expenditure reporting. We also found that state reporting did not include detailed information on other aspects of states' TANF expenditures, such as their planned non-assistance spending. While current law limits what information HHS can collect from states, we recommended that HHS identify areas within its statutory authority where it can require states to report additional information. Likewise, we also suggested that Congress consider providing HHS with enhanced statutory authority to collect more information on TANF expenditures. And we believe that these steps could enhance HHS's oversight of TANF. Finally, previously we found that HHS does not report on estimated improper payments for TANF. And improper payments are those that should not have been made or were made in the incorrect amount. According to HHS, again, it's an area where it does not have statutory authority to require states to report the kind of information that it would need to estimate improper payments. And we suggested that Congress consider providing HHS with that authority. Chairman LaHood, Ranking Member Davis, and members of the subcommittee, this concludes my prepared remarks, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Arkin. We'll now recognize Ms. Laren for 5 minutes.
Chairman LaHood, Ranking Member Davis, and members of the subcommittee. Today, I will be discussing 2 reports that we recently issued on the TANF program. The first looks at participant and outcome data that states collect on their non-assistant services and how they use that data to monitor and improve their programs. The second looks at the extent to which states use TANF to support their child welfare systems. As Mr. Arkin explained, state spending on non-assistance has increased as a share of TANF spending. Non-assistance can include anything that supports one of the block grant's 4 purposes, but within that, states have broad latitude in how they use the funds. And states have made different decisions about that spending depending on their priorities. As you can see in the graphic on the monitor, they use it for many purposes, including job training, education, child care, child welfare, and other services. But the question this raises is, what do we know about the participants in these programs? Who exactly is benefiting from TANF non-assistance funding, and how effective are these programs in achieving TANF goals? To get at that, we looked at the kinds of data states are collecting on participants and outcomes and how they're using that data. Our review of 7 states found that service providers, those at the local level, are collecting data on participants and outcomes. They're doing that to make eligibility determinations and to monitor program performance. Just to give an example, Ohio's largest category for non-assistance spending is childcare for low-income families. The state collects data on the income of the families to determine eligibility, as well as on outcomes for children like kindergarten readiness. Similarly, Texas uses TANF along with WIOA funds to support employment services, and as part of that, it tracks outcomes like wage growth and job retention. But that kind of data is generally not reported to the state TANF agency, and there are no federal reporting requirements for TANF non-assistance funds. So states reported a number of challenges in using data on those served with non-assistance funds. Challenges that hindered their ability to assess whether services were achieving their intended goals. For example, one state told us they collect data on participation in a marriage promotion program, but they can't assess whether the program improved marriage quality or duration. HHS technical assistance efforts have focused on improving data related to assistance rather than non-assistance. But individual states have identified promising practices for using data to help improve their programs. That's why we recommended that HHS facilitate information sharing among state TANF agencies on how they can better use data on non-assistance services. HHS agreed with this recommendation, but they have not yet implemented it. I'd like to turn now to states' use of TANF funds to support their child welfare systems, including addressing child abuse and neglect and supporting children who are in the foster care system. In a report issued this morning, we found that in fiscal year 2022, states spent $3.3 billion of their TANF dollars to support child welfare, 11% of overall TANF spending. I'd like to direct your attention to the map on the monitor, which shows the variation in how much states use TANF for child welfare. As you can see, while the majority of states spend less than 20% of their TANF funds on child welfare, a few, like Pennsylvania, spend no TANF funds on child welfare, while states shaded in dark blue, yellow, and red 40, 60, or even 80% of their TANF block grant to prevent or to address child abuse and neglect or to support children in the foster care system. Texas spent the most, with $417 million going to child welfare in fiscal year 2022. States also receive dedicated funding from Titles 4E and 4B of the Social Security Act for child welfare. But states told us they use TANF because it's more flexible and can cover costs not eligible for 4E reimbursement. We note in our report that our recommendation to improve TANF data collection efforts would increase transparency around the amount states spend on child welfare, as well as other programs. This concludes my statement, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Laren. We'll now turn to Mr. Dalkin for 5 minutes, and I'll just make a note. We'll most likely, after your opening statement, take a break so that we can go over and vote. So we'll take a short recess. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman LaHood, Ranking Member Davis, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to present our work regarding HHS's oversight of TANF findings in state single audit reports. Before I cover the results of our audit, I would like to start with an explanation of single audits. The term single audit is exactly what it sounds like, one audit of federal awards. Each year, states are required to undergo a single audit, which is conducted by an independent auditor and ensures that the states have adequate controls over federal programs and are complying with relevant program requirements. Single audits also identify deficiencies that require states to develop corrective action plans. In a report we issued last week, we reviewed the most current single audit reports for each state and found that 37 states had TANF deficiencies referred to as audit findings. 22 states had at least one TANF finding categorized as a material weakness, the most severe category of audit finding, which can indicate critical risk and issues in the federal program. The reason for these material weaknesses varied by state. Some examples of the deficiencies included failing to collect and maintain sufficient documentation, lack of procedures, and lack of internal controls. We also determined whether states had the same finding year after year and found out that approximately 23% had repeat findings for over 2 years, and some have remained unresolved for more than a decade. For example, one state had a repeat finding for 15 years. The finding related to the state's lack of proper segregation of duties, which could result in someone having the authority to create and approve payments to ineligible applicants. Another state had 5 material weaknesses that were repeated for 4 years, and one which related to an improper payment. The severity and persistence of these deficiencies indicated that states could improve how they administer the program, and that's where HHS comes in. As a federal awarding agency for TANF awards funds, HHS is charged with overseeing the TANF findings and to help the states resolve these single audit issues. We reported last week that HHS does not have sufficient audit resolution procedures. As I indicated earlier, some of these problems have been going on for more than a decade. Tracking and measuring the results of its single audit resolution process could help HHS focus on these repeat and severe deficiencies. Our first recommendation addressed this issue. We found that HHS did not issue many management decisions to states timely within the 6-month time frame as required to communicate HHS's evaluation. And we reviewed 5 years of data and found out that HHS issued less than 10% of the management decisions on time within that 6-month time frame. We also found that HHS frequently issued management decisions late. About 23% of the decisions were issued late,
We found one management decision letter for a state with 4 findings that was issued 4 years after the due date. At the time of our review, 2/3 of the required management decisions have not been issued. Timely issuance of management decisions is critical to ensure that states implement appropriate corrective actions. Our second recommendation addresses this issue. Earlier, I spoke about how single audits help ensure states are complying with relevant program requirements. During our audit, we found that HHS did not adequately ensure that it penalizes states for not complying with TANF requirements. For example, although HHS found several states that did not meet their statutory minimum work requirements, HHS did not follow its own procedures to reduce the amount of TANF funding to the states the following year. Without effective enforcement, HHS is unable to adequately encourage states to comply with legal requirements, resolve deficiencies in a timely manner, and reduce improper payments. Our last recommendation addressed this issue. This concludes my opening statement. I'd be happy to answer questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Dalkin. At this point, we'll recess and come back, and we'll begin with your testimony, Mr. Bagdoyan. Thank you. We're in recess.
They left me good prompts. Do not read this.
Check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Mic check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3.
the witnesses. Our vote series went a little longer than we expected, so thanks for your patience, and we'll continue on with the hearing. We left off with Mr. Bagdoyan, who is the Director of the GAO Forensic Audits and Investigative Services Team. You're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Indulge my allergy voice. I appreciate that. Good afternoon to you, Ranking Member Davis, and members of the subcommittee. Today, I'll discuss GAO's January 2025 report on fraud risks in the TANF program. Annual combined spending on TANF totals over $30 billion, which is potentially at risk for fraud, making it imperative to manage risk effectively, especially since fraud risks for federal programs are heightened in the pandemic's aftermath. Fraudsters who hone their craft during this period are opportunistic, agile, and tech-savvy, and target programs such as TANF inherently at risk for fraud. Risk in such programs is a function of high spending levels, sprawling reach, and complex, often restrictive program architecture, which collectively could also hamper oversight. In this regard, noteworthy examples from Mississippi and California illustrate large-scale TANF fraud and other misuse. In Mississippi, according to the state auditor, multiple individuals involved with its TANF program, including the director of the state's Department of Human Services, potentially misspent, converted to personal use, or wasted more than $77 million in TANF non-cash assistance grants. In California, according to court records, several cases involve multiple criminal entities, potentially stealing about $200 million, impacting hundreds or more victims by using tech devices such as pinhole cameras to repeatedly skim EBT cards that access TANF cash assistance at ATM machines. With the foregoing as context, I'll make two principal points about our findings. First, HHS has taken some steps to improve its fraud risk management capacity. For example, it identified 21 fraud risks from various sources whose controls require improvement. We independently categorize these risks in 9 groupings, such as skimming and diversion, as shown on the dual monitors. And it also created profiles for such risk. Profiles function as a risk's DNA and help prioritize assessed risks and inform decision-making, including crafting an anti-fraud strategy. Second, these steps notwithstanding, HHS still falls short on 5 fraud risk management fundamentals, collectively undermining its capacity to manage fraud risks. 1, lacking formal procedures for conducting regular fraud risk assessments to keep up with the dynamic nature of risk in programs such as TANF. 2, omitting key stakeholders from these assessments. HHS did not consult its state and local partners in whose jurisdictions risks originate, as I mentioned in the 2 prior examples. 3, not clearly defining tolerance, likelihood, and impact for each of the 21 identified risks. This is vital for implementing front-loaded preventative controls. 4, ranking all 21 risks as being equal in requiring improvements in controls. This counterintuitively defeats the purpose of prioritized, targeted action, which is the hallmark of effective fraud risk management. 5, not assessing 3 additional and potentially significant risks, such as EBT card misuse, which we independently identified, and whose impact as enabling fraud is illustrated by the California example I cited earlier. Given these shortcomings, we made 7 recommendations to HHS. It concurred with 5 of these recommendations and partially concurred with 2 others. As of today, all of these recommendations remain open. In closing, I'd underscore that managing fraud risks effectively is serious business. While HHS has creditably taken early steps, it should prioritize fraud risk management for TANF and act decisively and timely to implement all of our recommendations to address the shortcomings we flagged. This will help ensure that TANF risks are mitigated and funds reach eligible beneficiaries rather than fraudsters. Chairman LaHood, Ranking Member Davis, this concludes my remarks. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bagdoyan. We'll now turn to Ms. Summerlot for your 5 minutes of testimony. You're welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair LaHood and Ranking Member Davis, members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity today to provide some testimony on localized non-TANF services as provided in my local community of Marion County, Ohio. My name is Roxanne Summerlot, and I serve as Director of Job and Family Services in Marion County, which is home to 65,000 people in Northwest Ohio. For context, I would add that Ohio is one of several states that operates a state-supervised, county-administered delivery system for human services as well as public workforce development services. And I'd like to just briefly walk through some of the programming that we have in our community, which is considered non-assistance TANF programming. The most important or widely used program that we have in our county is our Prevention, Retention, and Contingency Program. All 88 counties in Ohio have such a program. Each is locally developed and designed to be responsive to their own community needs and is authorized by their local boards of county commissioners. In Marion County, our plan emphasizes and prioritizes supports that allow people to obtain and keep employment. Services under our plan range from car repair, fuel assistance, one-time utility and rent payments, through short-term training and kinship caregiver supports, as well as contracts with local nonprofits to provide other kinds of work supports. In 2024, we served 853 families, and to give you a brief example, I'll use Michael as an example, who reached out to us to ask if we could help with a car repair. Michael and his wife both work, not at the same place and not at the same time, and they have one vehicle within their family. They have 3 school-age kids. Their vehicle needed a wheel bearing replacement, and so we worked with Michael and our local vendor repair shop to get that repair made in such a way that neither he or his wife missed work. Both are continuing at their same employers, and Michael still works more than 50 hours per week. A newer program for us is called the Benefit Bridge, and that is a pilot program that's currently operating in 12 of Ohio's counties that's specifically responsive to our employer community, which told us that they often have issues working with people in terms of promotions or giving them more hours because they're concerned that that promotion will lead them to a benefit cliff. So with that program, we work directly with people facing the benefit cliff to make sure that they continue their forward momentum and not fall back to rely on public assistance. And that program spans about a 12-month period. Next is our year-round youth program. That is called the Comprehensive Case Management and Employment Program, or CCMEP. I would be remiss and I would regret not mentioning that Cheryl Vincent, who is with us today, was a chief architect of that program in Ohio. And Ohio made a policy decision several years ago that combined TANF funding along with WIOA youth funding to enrich that program and allow us to serve more youth and more in-school as well as out-of-school youth. And I have to say that program probably delivers the most success stories of any program that we have. The other program we're just opening applications for this week is our TANF Summer Youth Employment Program, We receive a state allocation of TANF each year for those counties that are interested in operating a TANF Summer Youth Employment Program, which places youth at various local employers throughout our community. That's paid experience, and we simultaneously work with those youth to build what our employers tell us are critical soft skills that they desperately need in their workforce. Last year, we had 30 youth placed at 14 different employers. We always have a waiting list. We have more employers and more youth that we can actually fund. I will mention Blake from last year, who worked at a locally owned manufacturing plant of ATV high-performance accessories. And at the end of the summer, that employer called to ask us if it was okay if they offered him full-time employment. Blake is still employed there and loves that company. In addition to those TANF programs, as was mentioned, Ohio uses TANF for the purpose of childcare, which is a critical work support and is often hard to find and harder to pay for. So we are able to serve 300 families through that program. And finally, the transfer to Title $20 from the TANF block grant is mostly critical in the child welfare, child protective space in the state of Ohio. We do use the social service block grant to fund adult protective services, and we're able to investigate 300 cases last year in that space. Finally, I would say that I would just reiterate that for all of our programming, in terms of program integrity, a nod to my fellow testifying people today, each one of our programs requires an application and an eligibility determination that is revalidating the most current information that we have for families so that we make sure that we stay compliant and we maintain the integrity of the TANF block grant. I would offer that our department name suggests Job and Family Services, that work is really central to everything that we do. And our mission is to first stabilize and then strategize to support families as they find their first, next, or better job and career. Every person's readiness is different, and so it is imperative that we have a continuum of services so that we can serve families where they are in their life and in their career. Thank you so much for allowing me the time today, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Summerlot. I want to thank all of our witnesses today for your valuable testimony on this important hearing. And I especially want to thank GAO for their thorough work to dig into some of the concerns raised by the subcommittee. And now we'll proceed to question and answer session by the members of the subcommittee. And I'll begin by recognizing myself. Mr. Arkin, you mentioned in your testimony that GAO found that states are not reporting complete information about TANF expenditures, and most states lacked transparent reporting on subgrantees. For example, in your testimony, you said 7 out of 31 states did not provide or had incomplete narrative explanations of non-assisted spending for FY 2022. This is extremely concerning because otherwise it's like a black box that we don't know how much behind what categories a state spends in. So my question is, your report provides recommendations for HHS, but are there any legislative recommendations you would make to improve transparency of state non-assistance spending so we can know the impact of the dollars and where they're actually being spent at?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. Short answer, yes, we do. And the issue is most of the reporting requirements in the law apply to assistance spending and actually prohibit HHS from collecting information on non-assistance spending because it's not a specific statutory authority provided in the law. So we think information that allows HHS to ask states to discuss what are they planning to do in the non-assistance area And to whom are they going to provide the funds? You mentioned the subrecipient issue. That's something that would help not just with oversight of spending, but also potentially help HHS provide an estimate of improper payments. It's really key information for them to be able to do that.
Thank you for that, Mr. Arkin. I'll next turn to Ms. Laren. Our subcommittee has spent a significant amount of time looking at federal child welfare spending. Last year, Ranking Member Davis and I worked to pass a bill to reauthorize the Title IV-B Child Welfare Program. One of the things we focused on was having in place the right data and performance reporting so we can see the quality of services and impact on families. According to GAO's recent report, TANF now constitutes approximately 1/4 of total federal child welfare spending, eclipsing state funding through the Title IV-B program. To you, Ms. Laren, do you have data about the specific demographics of the children in foster care funded by TANF as we do in the Title IV-B program?
You know, states are collecting data on the demographics of all the children they serve in their child welfare programs. So at the state level, that data does exist. But going back to one of the main findings of our report, data on non-assistance TANF funding, there are no federal reporting requirements. So even if that information is available at the state level, it's not being reported either to the state TANF agency or to HHS. So no, the answer is it's, you know, at the state level, they may be able to disaggregate which children are being served by TANF versus 4E or 4B, but that information is not reported up in a way that makes it easily accessible.
And do you have a recommendation on either a statutory change on fixing that reporting requirement?
Yeah, this really goes back to the recommendation that we made to Congress to give HHS more oversight authority, which would include more robust reporting requirements for non-assistance spending.
Thank you for that. Mr. Dalkin, I'll turn to you. In your testimony, you said GAO found nearly 1/3 of TANF audit findings were characterized as material weaknesses, the most severe category of findings that was made. As you know, one of the long-standing recommendations made by GAO is to measure and report improper payments in the TANF program. Would applying improper payments reporting to TANF help address or minimize these repeated audit findings, and how are these two related?
Thank you for your question. I believe it would be a little of each, because a material weakness could have a financial implication, or it could be related to controls. Improper payments relate more to the dollars. And so for the portion of the TANF issues that are material weaknesses related to dollars, that could be subject to the improper payments analysis. For the other portion that relate to the lack of internal controls, it wouldn't fall under the improper payments.
Thank you. Mr. Bagdoyan, in your testimony, you stated that HHS's fraud risk assessment portal does not have the functionality to assess and determine the magnitude of each fraud risk facing TANF. From your perspective, what are the key components to efficient fraud risk management, particularly as it relates to putting in place the right processes and technology?
Okay, thank you for your question. Mr. Chairman, the fundamentals are captured in this document, which is GAO's fraud risk framework. It's been around for 10 years or so. This is what we benchmark fraud risk management at agencies, and it includes fraud risk assessments, defining the likelihood and the impact of these risks. So it begins with an entity that takes the lead in conducting fraud risk management, doing fraud risk assessments, crafting a strategy and implementing that, and then measuring back to see how effective that strategy has been and making adjustments. But a fraud risk assessment that gets at what you mentioned is at the core, and technology such as deep data analytics can help get an agency to that point.
Thank you for that. That concludes my questions. I'll now recognize Ranking Member Davis for any questions he may have.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me thank all of our witnesses for your expert testimonials. Economists predict a 60% chance of recession due to the Trump tariff tax. Meanwhile, Speaker Johnson is determined to careen ahead with deep cuts to the very programs that would help families survive the Trump-created recession programs. Programs like Medicaid, food assistance, TANF, and the Social Services Block Grant. And even if some programs remain, the Trump administration has strangled the ability of agencies to be able to help. The administration fired thousands at the Department of Health and Human Services and closed half of the regional offices that manage state TANF and child care programs, including the one in Illinois. It was days before the administration even provided an email address for states left without federal contacts. Ms. Summerlot, can you tell us more about how Marion County uses TANF and the Social Services Block Grant, and how cutting or eliminating them would affect the families you serve?
Yes, Chairman LaHood, Ranking Member Davis, thank you for that question. In Marion County, in particularly responding to the social services block grant, and Ohio does transfer 10% of their TANF block grant to social services. In Marion County, our agency uses that primarily for adult protective services. We contract with our area agency on aging to investigate and then support people 60 and over who are at risk of abuse and neglect, self-neglect, and financial exploitation. And probably more critically, the majority of the social services block grant goes to supporting our child protective services system. I think in particular because 4E reimbursements have been diminishing over time, and we see a growing number of youth that have multiple needs and more complicated needs. So social services block grant reductions would likely impact the ability to serve those youth and those families. And TANF, I have mentioned several programs, our PRC program in particular, our comprehensive case management for employment program for youth, as well as the Benefit Bridge program, which now looks to help people not fall back as they're continuing their journey forward on the economic mobility ladder.
Thank you very much. Well, like Ohio, Illinois has a high percentage of children living with grandparents or other families who receive TANF child-only grants. This often is because TANF presents significant barriers for grandparent caregivers getting whole family benefits. Can you tell us quickly about how grandparents are served?
In Marion County, we developed a special category of support in our PRC plan for kinship caregivers. So we use the TANF dollars to support them in a variety of ways, including home repair, legal services, basic needs for kids, school-related costs, because the only support that they're getting is a small TANF cash grant for that child.
Thank you very much, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Now recognize Mr. Yakum of Indiana.
Thank you, Chairman LaHood, for holding this hearing, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. The Temporary Assistance for Needy Families Program, also known as TANF, is a critical government program that provides important funding to some of the most vulnerable families in our communities. There are countless examples of positive ways that TANF dollars have benefited Hoosiers. Just last week, I had the privilege of meeting with individuals from the Indiana Diaper Bank. They shared how through TANF funding and community partnerships, they were able to distribute over 7 million diapers last year across the Hoosier State. 1 in 2 Hoosier families often find themselves wondering if they'll have enough diapers to be able to send their child to daycare. That forces them to miss work and often deepen the economic hardship that they are already facing. The Indiana Diaper Bank runs their operations with only 3 full-time employees and 3 part-time employees, so that they can ensure that the most resources possible are going to the community. This is the way it should be. Ms. Laren, empowering families to help them achieve or maintain employment and improve their outcomes should be the goal of government welfare programs. Ensuring funds go to activities that support families instead of growing unnecessary bureaucracy is essential to the success of this program. That's why I introduced the Reduce Bureaucracy to Uplift Families Act, which lowers the administrative spending cap from 15% to 10% to free up more TANF dollars to help families find pathways into the workforce rather than expand bureaucracy. Do you believe that states should be encouraged to spend more TANF funds on activities that directly benefit families?
Our work, we went out to 7 different states and talked to states specifically about how they're spending their TANF grant and heard stories very similar to the one you just told about the diaper bank. I mean, we heard about really innovative and important work that's being done at the community level to support families. And I think, again, what we heard is that very little information about that is directed upward. So at the federal level, we're not necessarily hearing these stories because there are no reporting requirements to provide information to the at the federal level on how TANF non-assistance funds are being spent.
So do you generally believe that more TANF dollars from the federal level should be spent on direct benefits to families as opposed to the administrative overhead in the individual states?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we saw is that is where the money is going. It is going to benefits and programs that are helping low-income families.
Great, thank you. I think Indiana, by the way, is doing a great job in this area to keep their respective administrative costs down today at about 6%, which frees up more funds to support families. And what we'd like to see is more states follow the Hoosier model. Another important part of ensuring that funds go to those who need it most is rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse. Mr. Bagdoyan, in the GAO report, quote, additional funds needed to strengthen risk fraud management, the GAO reviewed the fraud risk practices at HHS. The report shared how most states disperse funds through electronic benefit transfer, or EBT cards, which allow people to withdraw cash and make purchases. GAO uncovered how EBT cards were sold on an e-commerce website with values from $100 to over $5,000. Why is it important to assess the magnitude of fraud risks?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Yakim. It's an excellent question. If you don't know what the risk is, you can't respond to it. That's the bottom line. And EBT misuse has been flagged in single audits. We have discovered it through other means, through our own research. So since it's a prevalent vehicle of dispersing TANF funds, it naturally attracts the attention of fraudsters. The California examples, for example, in this instance, fraudsters placed many cameras in ATMs and recorded the personal information of those accessing their funds, and then reversed the process and stole the money.
Thank you. And very briefly, what guardrails do you believe that we should put in place to decrease and prevent fraud?
Well, it again starts with the fraud risk assessments that will uncover what the risk is about and what controls are most suitable to respond to it.
Great. Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Yakum. Now recognize Ms. Chu of California.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Democrats agree that changes are needed to ensure TANF dollars aren't used for fraudulent purposes, like when Brett Favre and the state of Mississippi diverted millions meant for low-income families to fund a volleyball court at his daughter's college. But I find it very hard to believe Republicans are serious about addressing this. For example, the GAO has recommended that Congress give HHS the authority to collect additional TANF information from states. Democrats actually already introduced a bill to do exactly that, and it's called the TANF State Expenditure Integrity Act, led by Ranking Member Davis and me, and it would address what happened in Mississippi by finally giving the federal government authority over how states spend non-cash assistance funds, which is 80% of all TANF spending. But Republicans have declined to work with us to move this bill forward, which is shocking considering all this talk about fraud, waste, and abuse. We've also heard several GAO recommendations for how HHS and federal TANF staff can better monitor and prevent fraud, but those were pretty hard to be able to implement after Secretary Kennedy and Elon Musk's DOGE fired the entire TANF policy division, along with most of the TANF program integrity staff last week. They fired the very staff responsible for monitoring TANF fraud and shut down half of HHS's regional offices throughout the country, which investigated fraud, waste, and abuse on the ground. And yet, we haven't heard a peep from our Republican colleagues about this. They refuse to even question these firings. So let me say it's clear that Republicans in Congress aren't interested in genuine reform to improve program integrity. So why are they really holding this hearing? Well, we know they want to pass a reconciliation bill to give tax breaks to the ultra wealthy. And how will they do it? By proposing massive cuts to programs like Medicaid and, yes, TANF. But to cut a program, they first try to discredit it. And that's been their playbook over and over again, and that's why we are here today. Republicans are simply trying to set the stage to make devastating cuts to TANF. Now, TANF is not a perfect program, but it is a lifeline for low-income families and a vital source of child care and child welfare funding in many states. But Republicans want to take this money directly out of the pockets of the most vulnerable children and families and hand it over to the ultra wealthy. It's shameful, and Democrats won't stand for it. And Republicans have been silent on the Trump administration's recent cancellation of 5 TANF pilots authorized by Congress 2 years ago in a bipartisan manner. These pilots were testing new and better ways to promote work and improve outcomes for families receiving TANF assistance, and we're going to inform Congress on how to reform TANF so it's more effective in helping families achieve long-term stability. After a thorough selection process, 5 states were awarded a pilot, including my home state of California. But last month, HHS Secretary Kennedy abruptly canceled everything. And Ms. Summerlot, Ohio was one of those 5 states awarded the TANF pilot, which the administration canceled. Can you share more about what Ohio had planned to do with this pilot and why this would have been important for families and children in your state?
Yes, Chairman LaHood, Representative Chu, thank you. Yes, Ohio's pilot design was designed to build upon the framework that other programs and other pilots like the Benefit Bridge have been using, and that would have allowed us to scale those statewide. Currently, we have 12 counties that are operating with that framework and using a holistic approach to look at the entire person's life and strengthening each domain of that life to ensure that once they get a job, they can keep it and they can keep going. So the lost opportunity to scale was certainly a surprise.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Chu, and I'll recognize Mr. Miller of Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this critical hearing aimed at lifting Americans out of poverty and ensuring that the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, or TANF, known as non-assistant funding, is focused on helping low-income families have a step up toward economic independence. Since coming to Congress, one of my primary objectives has been to strengthen tools for individuals to have access to the education and training needed to compete in today's workforce. As discussed, the purpose of TANF is to provide time-limited cash assistance to eligible low-income families with children, promoting self-sufficiency. In addition to cash assistance, participants may receive other supportive services such as job training, food assistance, transportation, and other resources with a mission of lifting individuals up to achieve their potential and provide economic security. TANF provides about $16.5 billion annually to states to help millions of low-income individuals and families. In fiscal year of '22, states spent more than 44% of federal TANF and state funds on non-assistance services. The Ohio, through an Ohio TANF program, Ohio Works First, OWF, provides eligible low-income recipients with such benefits with a focus on workforce training tools. Also in my state of Ohio, non-cash assistance is delivered under the state's TANF block grant and provides emergency hunger relief by area food banks to the underserved and low-wage working parents, supplying nearly 2,000 local food pantries through pass-through TANF funding. I am grateful for the work of this subcommittee as well as the Government Accountability Office, known as GAO, to provide a closer look at how states use and account for TANF funds more effectively. Toward that end, I was proud to co-lead with Rep. Carey the Improved Transparency and Stability for Families and Children's Act, targeted at timely manner delivery of services while bringing needed transparency to the system. To Ms. Laren, in GAO report, HHS could facilitate information sharing to improve states' use of data on job training and other services. GAO examined a sample of 7 states. It noted in Ohio specifically, resources were deployed for job readiness, training, resume writing, and interview preparation, among other workplace skills. In addition, the report noted Ohio's Benefit Bridge program is supported in part by $15 million in TANF non-assistance funds. The Benefit Bridge assists low-income individuals who not meet certain eligibility requirements to pay for services such as transit, allowances, or additional job training. How do these TANF non-assistance workforce training programs help build labor skills, capabilities towards self-sufficiency and economic security?
Yeah, these programs really are critical. I mean, the second goal of the TANF program is to promote self-sufficiency through work. So it is one of the main purposes of the program, and these are the programs at the local level that help to achieve that. What we've found is that some states are doing a better job than others at collecting data on participants and using that data to improve their programs, make sure they're working, make sure that they are actually achieving those goals, which is why we recommended that HHS facilitate information sharing among states so they can learn from each other. And good practices that are going on, such as those in Ohio, can be shared with other states so there is more accountability and transparency.
Thank you. So Ohio leads the way? Yes, no, maybe? Yes or no? Yes? All right, I'll take it as a yes. Ms. Summerlop, welcome, as you know in your testimony, Ohio Works First and Prevention, Retention, and Contingency, PRC's program goals to help families retain employment in order to divert them from needed long-term cash assistance. Please share further how this and the Ohio Benefit Bridge program help individuals access job training and associated needs such as transportation and other challenges to entering the workforce. And really quick, OH?
IO.
There we go. All right.
Yes, quickly. In both programs, PRC and the Benefit Bridge, the first step is, again, evaluating what people have already and then building a plan to strengthen their situation, often including employment and training. So typically along a career path, usually healthcare, manufacturing, in-demand occupations, but education and training is always part of the plan.
Thank you, Ms. Summerlot. Mr. Chairman, I have more questions I'll submit for the record, but it seems as if Ohio leads the way. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. I'll now recognize Ms. Moore of Wisconsin.
just want to thank the chairman, the ranking member, and all of the witnesses who have appeared here today. I just want to reflect on 1995 when I was a state senator in Wisconsin, and the Honorable Governor Tommy G. Thompson ended welfare as we know it. And of course, we know that then President Clinton and Newt Gingrich agreed with it. They ended welfare, we know it. And so for the first time since the Social Security Act was put in place, the guarantee that we gave to people 5 years old and 6 years old and 3 months old, that baby, no matter what the employment condition is with your parents, no matter if somebody is in jail or out of work, baby, we are not going to let you starve. We're not going to let you be outdoors. We broke that promise to babies right then. And I was at the scene of the crime when it happened. I had 100 amendments that could have fixed TANF, the successor program at that point. But, it was very hard to do given the deliberate buildup of ending support to little children had started like back in the 60s. And it was all based on a big lie that Ronald Reagan pushed with a fictional character, this welfare queen who was riding a Cadillac and eating lobster dinners and had 80 names, 30 addresses, 15 telephone numbers, Social Security and VA benefits from 4 deceased fictional husbands. And didn't mention the kids. And nowadays, it's some white dude that's in his parents' basement playing Call of Duty all day. And so we have built the audience to treat this program like it's all waste, fraud, and abuse. Well, I'll tell you, I see that the GAO has identified areas of waste, fraud, and abuse that are here. How about the $4.5 trillion worth of tax giveaways that we're about to pass through this committee? Republicans have perpetuated these boogeyman lies, but if they really want to find the boogeyman, they ought to look at people like the former great NFL quarterback who was able to build a volleyball court based on the flexibility that we gave states. And indeed, a lot of this money, as some of my colleagues here have pointed out, have not gone into intervening in the poverty of these 6-month-old babies, but it's gone into building a huge bureaucracy of people who chase poor people around and berate them all day. You had a chance, as Ms. Chu indicated, to do something with closing the loop so that the Brett Favres of the world wouldn't happen. You guys wouldn't take that up. Last week, the Trump administration fired everybody in TANF, everybody, the whole Department of Health and Human Services, including the lead staffer for TANF. How are you going to improve this program or deliver services to 6-month-old Joey with no staff? Additionally, your reconciliation bill includes cutting the TANF block grant and eliminating the social services block grant. And I heard you, Ms. Summerlot, talk about how you help seniors with this, Meals on Wheels, all that's going to be gone. So we're not going to help 6-month-old babies. We're not going to help old people. We're going to talk about waste, fraud, and abuse and say that these recipients are that. Let me just say this. My time is running out, so I want to give my colleagues some credit for what they have done. They've used TANF funds and diverted it to fund anti-abortion clinics. They've had a stingy child tax credit where they left 19 million of the very, 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 very poorest children with no assistance. Every Republican voted for a budget which requires $880 billion in cuts to Medicaid, which is the same amount we spend on Medicaid for all children. They also voted for $230 billion in cuts to SNAP, which provided an estimated $44 billion in 2016 to help families with children buy groceries. You want to know something? My time is short, and I have a lot of complaints. But I do know I joined this committee because I knew that there would be people on this committee that would get back to the primary goal of TANF is to keep babies and children from starving and being outdoors. And now we are abandoning that purpose. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. I recognize Mr. Bean of Florida.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. A very good afternoon to you, and good afternoon, Work and Welfare Subcommittee, and a special welcome to our all-star panel. Really appreciate you being here. In 2023, Chairman Smith and our subcommittee's distinguished subchairman, Mr. LaHood, requested the GAO to conduct a comprehensive review of vulnerabilities in the TANF program based on state non-assistance spending. GAO's review found multiple areas in need of improvement and confirms TANF non-assistance, which constitutes 78% of total spending. It lacks basic financial guardrails, creating an environment ripe for fraud, waste, and abuse. Congress has work to do. We've got to come together to root that waste, fraud, and abuse out. Every tax dollar is indeed a precious tax dollar. We've got work to do. TANF's mission of raising people out of poverty and giving them temporary needy assistance is missing its mark. Mr. Bagdolian, in the report, Additional Actions Needed to Strengthen Fraud Risk Management, GAO shared how HHS identified 21 fraud risk categories, including billing fraud, misuse of award funds, misrepresentation when applying for TANF, and GAO cites in its report that one instance, employees use TANF funds for resort vacations, cosmetic surgery, and jewelry. That sounds like waste, fraud, and abuse to me. In fact, I think that's fraud. They were ordered to pay over $3.7 in restitution. What's your assessment, Mr. Bagdolian, of HHS existing practices for fraud risk assessments? Is it cutting the mustard, Mr. Bagdolian?
Well, thank you for your question, Mr. Bean. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, they have taken some steps, but they are far short of where they need to be. I displayed the fraud risk framework, which is our benchmark, and that requires to have a dedicated entity to run fraud risk management at any federal agency.
10-4. We've just got work to do. The ball's in our court for
Absolutely.
Congress to take action.
That's part of it, but also the states need to be involved. That's something HHS did not consult with its state and local partners to figure out, well, what are the risks in your jurisdictions?
10-4.
Where the risks
And I'm
are
sure,
originating.
and I'm sure the states are watching this hearing right now, so they're on notice that we've got work to do too. Ms. Laren, the report titled "Child Welfare: States' Use of TANF and Other Major Federal Funding Sources." The report found that the fiscal year 2024, 46 states use funds. Everybody listening, they use funds, TANF, that were for families and temporary needed assistance. They use these funds to plug holes in their budget. How about that? That's why Ms. Tenney, Claudia Tenney, on this committee and myself introduced a bill, Protect TANF Resources for the Family Act. Can you comment, Ms. Laren, how states are using TANF to plug holes in their own budget when it sounds like it's going to hurt the intended target of helping needy families? Is that true? What say you, Ms. Laren?
Well, one way that they're using it is to plug holes in their child welfare budget, and that money.
But that's not the intended target of TANF, though.
Well, the first goal of TANF is to keep families in their homes so they can be raised by their parents or kin. So prevention services to prevent children from entering the foster care system, that is an allowable use.
10-4. Thank you so much. Mr. Arkin, states have doubled their TANF unspent balances. They're hoarding this money. They're not using it for the intent. What's the driver? What's the driver of Mr. Arkin of the increase in unspent funds? Why are they hoarding this money?
Thanks for the question. We heard a few different things when we talked to states. In particular, the last couple of years, that amount has gone way up during the COVID pandemic, where states received a lot of other funds that, because they were more time limited, they would choose to use first. And because there is no limit on by when you need to spend TANF funds, they were able to hold on to those. There's some circumstances where we heard states overestimated the needs on the assistance side, and then we heard also that there were circumstances where Some of the sub-grantees may not have spent all the funds they thought they were going to need to spend or hadn't obligated them as quickly as they would have.
You would agree that this is something that Congress, this committee needs to look at to say there needs to be a timeline that
In
needs
general,
to get it out the door?
Yeah, I mean, in general, when we see growing unobligated balances, that can raise questions. Like, why is this happening? Is this the best use of funds? Is it being used in the way that is intended?
Will the gentleman yield?
Thank you. I would if I had any time left. I yield back. I'm so sorry. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bean. Recognize Mr. Evans of Pennsylvania.
Designed to be flexible.
I yield to Ms. Moore.
I just was listening to my colleagues' queries, and I just wanted to mention that the program was designed for this flexibility. So the waste, fraud, and abuse we're finding now, the program was deliberately designed to give the states flexibility, and some places have done a great job with it, and other places have not. But this was not an accident.
A question I have. I understand that you work, speaking to Ms. Summer, I understand that you work more with Ohio state staff when federal questions come up. Do you think the state staff will be affected by these regional offices closing and the loss of so many federal experts?
We in Ohio, our state partners maintain a really good line of communication between the field staff and the state offices. And I know our state staff relies very heavily on federal staff to answer our questions regarding guidance, technical assistance, policy clarification. I will say that when counties or us in the field ask a question, it's not a hypothetical question. It's a question that we need we need answers that are on point and delivered quickly. So to the extent that our state staff is not able to consult with their federal partners to get information that's accurate and to us in a timely way, that could be a concern.
Ms. Lambert, you mentioned in your testimony that TANF is the glue in serving low-income families in Ohio. A huge component of TANF is child care funding and every childhood education for families. State relies on this funding to support foster care, adoption, and child care abuse. Could you talk about how you use funding with TANF and the social service block grant to funding child care service, how these cuts to these funds would impact your work?
Yes, thank you for the question. In Ohio, the state transfers the full authority of 10% to the child care block grant and also the social services block grant. In addition to that, other TANF funds are earmarked for child care. Child care, as I mentioned, is a critical work support, and we have serious provider shortage for child care, and parents find it very, very hard to locate predictable child care in a safe environment and pay for it. So child care is a top priority for our state, and in fact, our governor has recommended an additional or $4 million per biennium of TANF to supplement the child care program. Again, the social services block grant program we use primarily for adult protective services for seniors that are in danger of neglect, abuse, and exploitation. And most often, the majority of social services block grant and that TANF transfer is for the child protective area, child welfare, which is experiencing difficulties in finding funding to address the very complicated needs of youth entering their system.
I'd like to thank the chairman. Thank you, ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Recognize Mr. Moran of Texas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all of you for being here today. This is an important subject. The Temporary Assistance for Needy Families Program, which we refer to as TANF, is one that I know in East Texas, where I come from, is used to help those temporarily in need, those families and those individuals, when they have those times of need, whether it's through cash assistance or other programs, services like utility bills, rental assistance, childcare, a lot of things that come the way that are used for appropriate times of need temporarily. And we forget sometimes that in 1996, when we created this, the Republicans created this, that it was intended to move folks from a federal welfare funding with open-ended entitlement programming to a capped block grant to the states. And it hasn't changed the level of funding since 1996. I think that's really important. And so we're trying to have accountability and transparency in that process. But of course, these 5 GAO reports show that there's a lot of work that we have to do, a whole lot of work. Those reports had findings like we've got to have more. They identified 21 fraud risks in 9 different categories, including billing fraud, misuse of award funds, and diversion. There's a lack of data on demographic characteristics that we've already talked about today, lack of data on participation and outcomes, 99 audit findings. This was amazing to me. That we have seen were repeated findings that were never addressed. So there's a lot of work to do. I want to go back to a couple of those and ask you all some questions about that. Mr. Bagdoyan, what are some of the biggest fraud risks that you have seen or that you're aware of in the TANF program?
Well, the EBT risk, Mr. Moran, is paramount. It is an easy vehicle for fraudsters to target. There have also been instances of falsified invoices for inflated costs or services not rendered. Also, the commingling of TANF funds with other sources of funding for assistance, basically disguising the original TANF funding and then spending it for non-TANF purposes. So those are some of the prominent ones that we have focused on. And as you mentioned, all these risks do need really focused assistance over the long term to address.
Ms. Summerlot, I'm going to ask you, you just heard that answer from Mr. Bagdoyan. You put some of these things into practice day after day. Does it bother you to hear that some of these funds are being misused in a way or captured in a way that is not intended for the purpose and for those needy families that actually need it? Does that bother you?
Well, any level of abuse, fraud, waste, misinterpretation is of concern. Certainly, program integrity and compliance is paramount for those of us that work in the program every year. Actually, the point about invoices coming through for inflated costs or the point about just vendors or providers for other TANF purposes.
Those are problems in the program, and so Ms. Laren, I want to come to you and ask you how are states evaluating and taking care of some of those problems? In particular, let me ask you specifically about the TANF-funded non-assistance services such as job training or early childhood education. How are they currently evaluating and the improvement and the outcomes for families in poverty?
Well, some states are doing it better than others. So Texas actually is a good example because they collect the same data on their TANF recipients as they do from their WIOA recipients on their job training. It's a whole range of outcomes that they are tracking to determine whether that money is actually achieving TANF goals.
And other than sheer will, is there some reason why the other states just don't want to do that or haven't done that?
Well, some of them are not aware of these promising practices that, and which is why we recommended that HHS encourage states to share information about how they're using data. Yeah.
With my last question, I'm going to come to you, Mr. Arkin. In the GAO report, enhanced reporting could improve HHS oversight of state spending. GAO found that Texas appropriates TANF funds to provide workforce training to individuals, and that the state plans to spend down their unspent balance in this manner. Could you provide additional insights as to how states have used TANF non-assistant funds to help Americans gain employment and meet local employment needs, lifting people out of poverty and away from the point where they need this help?
Sure. Thanks for the question. I mean, that's one of the non-assistance examples of spending is employment training, support for training and education to help people find employment, to help people become more employable, to provide childcare for people who need to seek and hold employment. And so that's one of the main uses of non-assistance spending.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Moran. Recognize Mr. Gomez of California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I actually was a intern back, I think it was the summer of 1996, and it was for a county supervisor out in Riverside. He was a Republican county supervisor. And I remember the issue of TANF, right, implementation, and how do you kind of make it more efficient? How do you ensure that there isn't any fraud? And I remember I was very interested in it because I believe that we can all kind of agree that we don't want to have any kind of fraud in any federal program as much as possible, because if there is, then people can use that to undermine those programs and those attacks. Because these programs, as we know, provide cash assistance, help people with childcare that can't afford it. They're so crucial. But I really kind of want to focus on the GOP elephant in the room, is that there's nobody left at the Health and Human Services even to implement some of these recommendations. Trump and Elon Musk and his Doge bros fired over 10,000 Health and Human Services workers, including almost everyone that works on TANF in the policy shop, and I think closed the regional office in California. So if states can't get their grants approved by Health and Human Services, they can't use the money. It's a backdoor way to legally cut congressional approved funding. And we've seen this tactic over and over again from this administration. So I'm glad you're here talking about these fixes, but when they're taking a chainsaw, as Elon Musk likes to say, to entire departments, your fixes are not going to make a difference when there's nobody there to carry them out. Like, you guys provide great insight, but this is kind of this administration's tactics. Social Security, they axe the staff there too. So now retirees and folks with disabilities have no way to have their benefits issues resolved. Also, let's not forget about tax day next week. How can people expect to get their tax refund, especially the money that they're owed when the IRS staff is being slashed? And this is all like TANF is meant to do what? To help people get by. But now we have skyrocketing rents. We have grocery prices are getting too expensive. Childcare is out of control. And what's going on? Tariffs, right? They're increased the cost of living for working people by $3,800, according to a Yale study for the year, $3,800. So what I find interesting is that we're talking about these programs and making adjustments, which I think are crucial. But when you're fundamentally taking out the foundation of these programs through the department, then it's these adjustments are not going to get done what we want done. One of the things I believe in is good government. How do we make programs work better? But when there's no one there to do the job, then how are we going to implement those recommendations? So I do appreciate all of you being here. You do great work. It is as nonpartisan or as possible. So I appreciate it. But this is kind of where I'm focusing on, is the fact that we have TANF It's going to be hard to implement. We're not sure if people are going to get their Social Security checks. The cost of living is going up. Medicaid is going to be slashed. And then, these tariffs are impacting every single person. I have a toddler, Mr. Chairman. He's 2.5 years old. And I had no idea how many pairs of shoes a toddler goes through in a given year. And I actually did research. 98% of all shoes are made outside this country. Or actually, somebody said it was 99%. A given child goes through 2 to 3 pairs of shoes per year. So, and the cost averages anywhere from 15 to 60 or even more. So if you kind of do the math, a family for a child pays $300 to $800 over a 5-year period for shoes. That doesn't account diapers that are made out of the country, baby wipes, toys, you name it. So I think, Mr. Chairman, I want us to work together to try to undo these tariffs that are going to hurt working families. And also, these programs do matter, and I want us to figure out how to implement some of these recommendations, but not in a way that just kind of is out there with no real difference in the end, especially because there's no staff to carry it out. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Gomez. That completes our question and answers today from all of the subcommittee members. Let me again thank the witnesses today for the contributions you've made to this hearing today, the work that you've done to put into this. It was extremely helpful, substantive, and as we continue to do our work as members of Congress on this subcommittee, we look forward to staying in touch with you. I think what we've heard today from the members of this subcommittee is there's a shared interest in ensuring that we improve efficiency and bolster the accountability of TANF to ensure it is supporting the most vulnerable Americans as it was intended. So with that, our hearing is adjourned, and please be advised that members have 2 weeks to submit written questions to be answered later in writing. Those questions and your answers will be made part of the formal hearing record. With that, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you.